I mean, tell me first of all, just what it was like to be out there and what all you did when you were out there.
Great, thanks, Dan. I appreciate the opportunity. What it was like to be out there, we had a couple things going on. We had the experience of getting there through torrential rain and wind and everything else in advance of Sandy, but we also had a new situation for us. We don't typically deal with hurricanes in Indiana, obviously. We deal with small things like tornadoes, but so we had to first encounter the 20-hour plus trip to New Jersey. In advance of that, we were able to plan for where we're going to stay, and these were facilities provided by the state of New Jersey, so that was helpful. But directions, getting 110 responders, 44 vehicles. I don't know if you've ever experienced a whole bunch of fire apparatus or ambulance at an accident scene, but if you think 44 vehicles, that's an awful lot to go down the interstate. So getting all those individuals to that place with fuel and food and everything else that goes along with a long trip, that was quite an adventure in and of itself.
What was it like when you got there? You're around Atlantic City, right? That area?
Correct. We were actually, our staging area was a fire training center outside of the Atlantic City airport. And getting there, in a way, going to a facility that most of us were familiar with from an occupational bias, it was comforting. I mean, I don't think anybody likes being away from home, and especially going into a hurricane versus leaving one or evacuating. We do a whole bunch of trying to have people leave the hazard, but going right into it and arriving in a place where we were comfortable was really helpful.
What was it like to be there as Sandy blew overhead?
Well, expectations ran the gamut. We had some individuals that had experienced that, whether they had lived in areas prone to hurricanes before or maybe experienced one, however that may be. So we're all left just kind of wondering. The radar screens were all over people's phones and this and that. We were staying at a Federal Air Marshal's Training Academy, so it was a very secure structure. It was hurricane rated, brand new, so it was very nice for us. So we felt safe. It gave us a chance to maybe try to figure out what was going on with Sandy and what it would be like. So we had some people looking out windows and then we had some individuals looking at radar. So it was, it was expectation setting was a big one for us.
Once Sandy had passed and you went outside for the first time, what did you see?
Well, it's very dark. We didn't see a great deal, but I mean, it was this, we saw wind. Or we felt wind, I apologize. We saw a lot more rain than what we would typically see in an Indiana thunderstorm. So those combinations were in a way familiar, but the biggest thing that came out of all that was the realization that it's not stopping anytime soon. We've all seen rain, we've all experienced wind and this and that. We've all seen tree limbs down, but it just kept going. And there was really no stopping it for many, many hours. So that was probably the biggest thing that we all took away from that was, all right, well, glad we have plenty of rain gear.
Were you responding to emergencies during Sandy, or it was after Sandy had passed really that you were, being utilized?
Well, both actually. We had three primary missions for our strike team deployment. And in priority order, it was assist with evacuation, search and rescue, the EMS support of those functions. And then the EMS support of 911 operations. Certain towns were without 911 service after Sandy came through. And then the other mission, the other priority within that mission was to support emergency shelter operation, having an EMS support function in the shelter. Not just going to the shelter, transporting and leaving, but once responders, and we had sent our ambulances there. Once they were in the shelters, they were in the shelters. There was no transporting. In the state of New Jersey, sustained winds over 40 miles an hour, all responders are not to respond. They are to shelter in their vehicle. Anything sustained winds over 70 miles an hour, they're to go seek more sturdy structure. So those two things we certainly weren't familiar with. But you don't have to tell a responder more than once that if we have sustained winds to go seek shelter. So that worked out well.
And then just as the next couple of days unfolded, what else did you do and what did you see?
Well, once again, we had this night group out, and because we came in really late, but we had this group out for the shelter, so we had to bring them back and rehab them, give them time to recover from their 12 hours spent at these shelters. Again, with reinforcements to backfill them. Then we went into the response mode. Well, the very first thing, and we do this throughout all phases of emergency management and certainly emergency response, was what's our situation? So we staged at the Emergency Operations Center there at the Fire Training Center at the airport and worked with their Emergency Operations Center to try to figure out, all right, well, what services do we have? What's the status of the shelter? Can we communicate with them? So when a lot of that happened through command staff to figure out, we're not going to send responders out blindly into an area. So then we, using like GPS transponders, we had each responder group there. We all had a couple different forms of ways to communicate, and then a fail-safe. You will go here, you will shelter in place, and then we will come to you, that type of thing. So once we knew our situation and realized that we're going to go into search and rescue mode, that was our biggest mission at that point. But we still had some of the sheltering options that we had looked at doing, to where if we had surplus resources that weren't covering the immediate search, the immediate rescue or assistance with evacuation, or the 911, then they would go to the emergency shelters to support those.
And the next couple of days after that is kind of very similar.
Correct. However, we had added Ocean County. Initially, we were working in Atlantic County, which is everywhere around Atlantic City. We had a phenomenal search and rescue team and EMS support just outside of Atlantic City on the second day we were there. That was quite extraordinary in what they were able to search in a short period of time. We had also sent responders up to, I believe, District 1 and District 6 up to Ocean City, to the area around Seaside Heights and Brick Township. I believe that was on the news quite a bit. But I mean, we sent them up there to partner with a local fire company to provide the 911 response, but also to work with their search and rescue teams. Now, the problem was it wasn't safe to go in there. When it's dark, you're not going to do any type of operations with power lines down and this and that. So there was a certain amount of waiting before individuals can get in there. And since it was all barrier islands, one of the bridges was not able to be traveled for 3 days. So we didn't get in there until the last day.
What were some of the worst things that you saw driving around?
Well, I guess worse is kind of nebulous in my world, but
do you see like homes on the road? Or,
correct. You had the if you think about what we see in Indiana with some isolated tornado destruction. Imagine that throughout your entire city. You had areas that were affected just as drastically or just as dramatically with 90-mile-an-hour straight line winds plus, but just broadcast over a tremendously long area. And once you were able to wrap your head around that, and then the amount of water that was around, and hydraulics that water produces and what it moves and where it pushes things. Sand was another one. We had 8-foot sand drifts. That's certainly not anything we encounter here, but we certainly encounter the snow version of that. So I mean, those were some pretty bad things to look at and to see how that would affect an individual.
What's your emotion being there? I mean, are you happy to help, or is it tough to just work? Or
most assuredly, I'm happy that we were able to provide support. I mean, what we do with the district task force concept, maybe some individuals think we're going in there and we're effecting these marvelous rescues, and we're certainly capable and willing to do that. And in certain situations, we would do that. The primary job of our district task force in this situation was to support them, to provide EMS support for these operations. So, it is their disaster. So we don't go in and call the shots, run the show. Now we take care of ourselves and certainly follow the incident command system to a T. But in doing that, we're able to balance some animosity that may be there of individuals coming in and taking over a situation. Well, the reality is you've exceeded the resources. So we provide them, we bolster what they have. And then if there's certain things that we can take over, for instance, we had On the third day, we in the town of Brick, we had a couple ambulances that took 911 calls for many hours, but that was their job. Now, they were given maps. A lot of the road signs and features were compromised, so it was challenging to do that. But that left some of their local responders, law enforcement, fire, EMS, to focus on more urgent priority like search, and while we were able to handle some of the other elements.
What's the one story you remember from being there for 3 days?
Yeah, it seems a little like an eternity, but
What's the one story you remember?
Well, I can't honestly say that like one stands out. I was thoroughly impressed with the way our responders collaborated with each other, people they hadn't met, but even more so how you could go into a situation with responders from another state and you were able to work together as a team without compromise. So my stories would be, aside from quite a trip going out there, based around just seeing how these groups of people with a common purpose and esprit de corps to go in there and affect change and to have an impact that was positive, that was sustainable and consistent for the people that had their entire world turned upside down.
What did people tell you once they found out you're from Indiana?
Well, they'd never experienced that before. Indiana's never sent a task force like this there. So I had while we were preparing for a third day, I was actually outside of the command center. I was in the field working more of a liaison position. But I had a couple that came over and they noticed I was standing around the Purdue Fire Department pickup truck, and they looked at that vehicle and they really couldn't understand. They're like, well, how did you get here? And then went through the thumbnail version of the two states talking, the resources being presented, and then responding out. And they were thankful. They didn't really know what to do at that point. We received, of those homeowners and those individuals that weren't, that didn't experience trauma, and we weren't, this and that, but the ones that were maybe not immediately affected, we received more requests. What can they do for us? How can they make our stay in New Jersey more? Or we even had an individual that approached the command post and said, "Well, you really need to come back here in a year or so and see how this, see how we want this to look for you." So that was fabulous. I mean, we're used to that in Indiana working together, but it was really nice going to another area and having it.
And then leaving, is it tough to leave? Are you ready to come home, or is it? I would think in some ways it's tough to leave, just seeing that there's still so much devastation, but it's time for you to leave and other people to come and fill your place.
Well, honestly, I think you nailed it. We're torn. We all have families and commitments and this, that, and the other thing that we want to get back to. But when you're so close to seeing so many different lives affected in so many different ways, and knowing that you have these skill sets and you have these abilities and you really want to help, it's a balancing act, because we also know that those skills and those abilities and those functions are finite. We cannot respond 12-hour, 24-hour operational periods for a month. It's just not realistic. So when we were able to have our backfill resources that came in this case it was a Pennsylvania emergency medical service strike team, it was relieving, because it was kind of like, all right, we've taken this situation, well, from its infancy, since we were there in advance of Sandy, and then now we're handing it off. So we had made sure all the briefings were there. Here's our notes. This is, these are the ongoing operations. This is what we found. So we felt good. We had that comfort level that, not that there was any question that they weren't going to do a phenomenal job, but that it was in good hands. And as we all saw, the situation is expanding. So we came in at 110 individuals and 44 pieces of apparatus. All those numbers are now doubling and tripling. So we felt pretty good in that regard. Now, you can't help but look back and did I do everything I could? Well, I mean, we all know they did. And so you just kind of have to take solace in the fact that it's in good hands, and then move on to continue with the rest of the mission, in that case, the 20-hour trip back.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, it's just, we were able to have a lot more contact with what was going on in the outside world, unlike our last deployment within the state of Indiana with Henryville. So I really want to thank individuals for expressing their concern. How can they help the task force? And more importantly, just all the individuals through social media and even some programs at your station with what they can do for New Jersey and New York and Maryland. In fact, that whole area. They're going to be feeling this for many months and certainly over a year with some of the response or recovery efforts that they have. So help where you can.